Alright guys, welcome back to the second video in this REST API series. And in this video we want to start building our own REST API from scratch. So we are starting practically from scratch. I have not done any other thing apart from creating a virtual environment which I called env. Alright, so I have activated the virtual environment. You can see this bracket here. So what we need to do now is just simply install Django and the Django REST framework. So pip install, using the pip install Django and Django REST framework. A couple of seconds to install. Alright, our installation is complete. So you can see successfully installed Django 3.2.4, Django REST framework 3.12.4. Alright, so now we can create our Django project by simply saying Django and dash admin start project. So we'll give the project a name. We can call it alright, so we created our Django project. We've created our Django project, which we have here already, and we can see our Django files are in here. Alright, that's cool. So what we should do now, we should add the REST framework to our installed app. Remember, we installed the Django REST framework, so we need to add it to our installed app like this, rest_framework. We save this, and that's that. Alright, so the way we're going to build our app, we're going to start from the authentication section. Alright, so we're going to first of all build out our own authentication system, create users, create profile for the users, and then we do something like a chef book, which is going to be like the chef portfolio, where anybody that signs into the site that decides to be a chef or is a chef can create a chef book to actually keep track of those that are chef and those that are not chef. It's only chef that can create a recipe, so something to differentiate those that are chef and those that are not chef. So first, let's create a new app. Okay, we're going to create an app. Let's move into the REST. Alright, here we can access our Python, manage the Py script. I believe you guys are familiar with the basic Django commands and all that. Okay, so manage the site, then start app. We're going to call this app authentication. You can call it any name that you prefer. Alright, our app is created. So if we head back to in here, we have our authentication app already. That's good. So what I'm going to do now, I'm simply going to rename this very folder to be source for us not to get confused. So I'm going to rename to as source. The Django REST framework authentication system actually comes with different type of authentication schema that we can use to implement authentication. There are different type of authentication schema and different type of package to implement authentication very easily in the Django REST framework. We have the default implementation of authentication that we can actually do to get authentication working. While the when building your authentication, first you either specify the authentication schema in your settings, or you set it in the view. Depends on how you want the authentication to work. Probably you want only authentication to be authorized in, you want users to be authorized in only some certain views, and you want some views for anonymous users to be able to access some view. In that case, you have to set the authentication schema in the view. Alright, I'll show you how to do that as we code along. But if you want the authentication to be in all the app, that is, that will affect every area of all that, you have to set it globally in the settings file. Alright, look at that. They say the default authentication schema may be set globally using the default authentication classes settings. Alright, so we still need to set this. So let's grab this authentication schema and copy this and bring it into our settings. So in our settings, the Py file, somewhere down here, alright, this is the REST framework default authentication classes. we have the basic authentication class and we have the session authentication class. The basic and the session authentication class signify our default Django authentication system, where users provide username and password and get authenticated. Or for a standard API standard, that is not sufficient. The common and preferred standard in authentication API is token authentication. Alright, so Django also allows us to do that. You can use token authentication, or which we are going to do. But one interesting thing about the Django REST framework is that, okay, you can see the different authentication class, like the base authentication that we talked about, which is our default Django, and also this is the token authentication schema class that I talked about earlier. Alright, so this it says the authentication schema uses a simple token-based HTTP authentication schema. Token authentication is appropriate for client-server setup, such as native desktop and mobile clients. Alright, so how does this authentication actually work is when the user sign in into the site by providing maybe their username and the password, a token is returned back to the user, or a token is generated for the user, and that token is what the user will use to authorize whenever he's making requests to any of the endpoints. Alright, so I will advise you to read more about the Django authentication, so there you get more understanding of it. So, and there are a lot of third-party packages that help us to implement authentication very easily, and they are very robust. It means they provide everything for us that we need for authentication, and there are a lot of them. We have the Django auth toolkit, and we also have the Django REST framework auth, JWT, that's the JSON web token authentication. These are third parties and libraries that just give us simple implementation of API authentication, and many of them support the token-based authentication. So the one we'll be using is the Djoser. It's a very easy to implement authentication framework, and one of the reasons why we'll be using it is because it allows us to easily work with custom user model, and it also supports token authentication. It says the library provides a set of views to handle basic authentication such as registration, login, logout, password reset, account activation. This package works with a custom user model and it uses token-based authentication. Alright, so these are the two major reasons. Token-based authentication, which is a general standard, a common standard for API auth, and also we're going to be using a custom model. Alright, so this is what we'll be using for this very tutorial. Maybe sometime along this channel we'll do a tutorial where we explore other authentication package. Alright, this is the Djoser documentation. You can see it says REST implementation of Django authentication system framework, and it's very easy to set up. First of all, we have to install it, so you just grab the installation code and we'll head back to we just paste and install that. It will take some seconds to install. So while that is going on, we can simply add it to our install app. So we'll copy this and go to our settings file. Here in our settings file, in our other installed app, we also need to add our authentication app to our installed app. So let's quickly add the authentication Djoser. Okay, so that's for that. And lastly, the URL. This we have to bring this into our base URL. So grab this and we head to our, let's save this base project URL.y file. We just add this in here, and then let's change this to a part. Then we need to bring it include in here. Alright, so that's all for the basic setup, and we go next we need to actually make migration. I almost forgot, we need to make migration. We do that shortly. Then Alright, so implementation of the token based authentication is both token based and JWT authentication can coexist at the same time. Simply follow the instruction for both method, and it should be that if you want to use token JWT and token based authentication, but we are going to be using only token based authentication, we will not be implementing in the JWT authentication here. So for us to actually get that, we need to bring in the auth token, because the Djoser framework is actually working with the Django auth token. So we just need to add this to our installed app. So we'll grab this here and bring it into our installed app. We'll place this one here. So this will actually handle the setting up the token model for us and everything we need for the token authentication. And also we need to bring it into the URL too. That's the token authentication. We bring this also into the URL in here. We bring this also here. To actually clean up our URL in our authentication app, we can just create a url.py file. Alright, so while we simply bring in these two URLs here, just bring in these two, cut it out from here and bring it into our app URL file. So we need to quickly set up here, just say from Django.urls. Okay, so in here we can set up a URL pattern that contains a list of paths, so we can just paste in those two parts here, but we can change the route to just be to be an empty slash. Then while in, you can save this, then while in here we just bring that in, so we can just say path in those. We want to load in the, once we go to this route, we want to load in this URL. Okay. And lastly, since we are specifying that we are using token based authentication, we need to bring that into our settings file. In our settings file down where we have the REST framework settings that we bring it before, so we need to add the, if you go down here you can see where they ask us to bring it into our default settings. Alright, so we'll bring it in here. You can as well take out this basic auth, but you can also leave it if you want. Alright, let's just take out the basic auth and leave the session and the token auth. Alright, so let's bring in the token auth first, and I think that's all we need to do now is to make migration. To make a migration, then we are good to go, except maybe we want to change there are other settings also that we need to set for the Djoser, but before then let's make a migration. Command line 2 as a terminal. So let's quickly run python manage.py. First of all, let's run server and see if everything works fine first. Alright, we have no errors, that means no issues, everything was set up correctly, and say you have 21 on apply migration. Your project may not work properly, so let's quickly make migration. So just quit our server and just run python. That's it. That is needed for the Djosers and all that. So now we can run our server again. We can test out our endpoints to create new user and to log in. Alright, so if we head over to our browser, the Django REST framework actually comes with its own default graphical user interface that we can use to test API. You can also use Postman. So if you actually go to that right now, you'll see the default graphical user interface that we can use to test API. So endpoints are provided for us. We go to our endpoint in the Djoser. To create a new user, we can go to /users. So if we go to /users now, we'll see the form provided by is to create a new user, which is asking for an email. You can just bring a default email, and let's say test user 1, and then alright, so let's test this out. Once we say post, you see we were able to create a new user now. Alright, so let's try and sign up with this user. If we want to sign up, the endpoints for us to actually sign in at me, looking endpoints, let's check out our endpoint. Look at it. We'll go to token/login. Simply means that when if we go to this endpoint, alright, here we have the form to actually log in, but you can see the default implementation is actually asking for username, alright, for us to log in. So if we write the default username that we use, which is the user1, and the password, and if we log in, you see our auth token that was given to us. Alright, so this is how token authentication works. With this token now, we can make requests to any other given route. So we can test it out now to get the user object from there's a URL, there's a endpoint to actually get the user object. So let's go to this, let's try to get this endpoint now. If we go to Postma, let's test this out in Postma. We get requests to this endpoint here through Postma, and if we make a get request, let's see what will happen. You see what is saying: authentication credentials were not provided. That means for us to actually make requests, we need to provide that auth token that was returned back to us when we logged in. Alright, the time we log in, this auth token. So grab this auth token and you can go back to Postma. I think in the header, and the header we want to add is a authorization. The key is going to be token space, then you paste it in. Then with this header sets now, once we make a request, sorry, this is supposed to be token, not alright. So once we make a request now, you can see we get our user object back. Alright, so that's actually the default implementation, but this is not actually sufficient for us. We want to add more feeds when we are creating user, and also want to use the email feed for us to actually be able to log in. And actually the Djoser actually provides some settings for us that we can use. If you go to the settings, you can see where it says login feed, name of the feed in user model to be used as login feed. This is useful if you want to change the login feed from username to email. Alright, so in our settings, we are going to provide some Djoser settings, and here we can provide some settings like the login email. Alright, so if we save this and we head back to our login, let's try to log in again. Let's go to / I think we have an endpoint also to log at. So if we go to that, URL should be here. Alright, we can actually go to this endpoint and try to use it to log at. If we alright, so now we are logged out. So if we go to login again, now that we've set our login feed to be email, if we go to login again, you see it's asking now for our email, no longer our username. Alright, now we've make our login feed email, but if you go to the endpoint to create a new user, which is /users, you see that the create user feed is just the email and the password. But in our app, we need more feeds to create a new user. Want to add more feeds to it. and for that we're going to create a custom user model so we can add more other feeds to it. And in the default user model, the email feed is not unique, so for that we're going to make it unique. And so for that we'll head over to our models.py file. Alright, now in our model we need to import something from Django, so we import from django.contrib.abstract the abstract user class. Alright, so this is actually the default implementation of the user model in Django. So if you really want to see this class, we can check it out in our source code. In this is our virtual environment for this particular project that we're working on, because that is not open now. So go to script, we are looking for the contrib app. Inside the contrib we are looking for the auth app. Then inside the app we are looking for the model. Alright, beautiful. So if you don't really know how to access the source code for Django project, this is how to get it in our virtual environment. So we are looking for abstract user, which is the class that we are importing. This is the Django source code, so you are not allowed to change anything here except you know what you are doing. I just want to show you the abstract user class that we are expanding. Alright, this is the abstract user class that we are extending. Is extending the abstract base class. The abstract base class is like the foundation of the user model. If you want to build a user model from scratch by yourself, this is the class that you need to import. It's a blank slate for you to build your user model from scratch. But this is the default build of the user model that we normally use out of the box without any changes around. So you can see the feeds that are here is the username feed, and this feed is the unique feed. Alright, and we have other feeds, which is the first name, last name, and the email. And so this contains the default implementation of the user model. So because we are still going to be using the default implementation, all we just need to do is to add more feeds to it. That's why we are extending from the user model. But if we actually want to customize the authentication to our own taste, maybe we want to do some other logics in our own custom logics like that, we have to import the base user. So I just want to show you, so we can close this now and head back to our project. Now you know this class, so we're going to create our own class. We're going to call this class user, which is going to extend this abstract base user. Alright, so like this now, this our user class has the default authentication model class that we normally know in Django. So what we need to do now, we need to change the email feed. We want to make it required because it's not required there, so we'll call this email address. Also we want to add another new feature which is going to call is chef. This is a feed to note if the user is a chef, so we're going to make this a boolean feed, alright, or not. So by default we're going to set it to false. Alright, so not all users are chefs, some are just there to actually see different recipes and probably use them, while the chef are the ones that can create new recipes and add new food categories and all that. So that's that. So in this case we need to set the required feeds. Alright, remember we are importing the abstract user, so all the default feeds that are in the abstract users are also available to us. So we want the username to be required, also we want the first name, so these are the feeds that the user will see to actually sign up. Then we need to provide the username feed, which is obviously supposed to be the login feed, but we're going to set it to email. And then lastly we're going to define a few function called get username. Alright, so that's that. Alright, so once we save this model, we are going to create a serializer. We're going to override the create user serializer that the Djoser provides for us. So in our authentication app, we are going to create a serializer.py file, and before we forget this model, we need to bring it over to our settings file to let Django know that we are going to be using this new user model instead of the default user model. And we're going to set the auth underscore user, which is the authentication, the app name, which is this authentication, that's what we provide here, dot user, which is the model name, class name. Alright, so we are telling Django that this is the user model that I want to use for authentication. So save this. We also need to make migration, if not there will be some issues. Alright, like you can see our code is already broken because we need to make migration. And before we can make migration, we need to actually delete the previous migration that we made before. But before we go there, let's create the serializer for the user model. So we can just import from REST framework, and then from Djoser .serializer. So we want to create serializer. I want to also import the user serializer. Alright, so we're going to create our own class now, which we're going to call user. Let's just name it user create serializer, the Djoser user create serializer. Alright, in here we're going to create a method, and this method is going to inherit the Djoser user create serializer.meta. Alright, so we're going to inherit the method that comes along with this user create serializer, so that we can specify our model, which should be the user. So we need to import the user model. So we need to specify the feeds that we want in. Alright, so these are the feeds that will be returned back when the user creates a new account. So that's for that. Then we also want to override the user serializer. This is when you query for user objects, so we'll be using with a relationship. So we need to override this also, and then so this is kind of similar to everything we did here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to grab the whole of this, and in this case we are going to call this user serializer. Get the same model, which is user model. So and the feeds we want are also the same. We want the ID, the email, username feeds. Alright, so these are feeds that we also want when we were using the. So this is what we'll be using when we are performing any kind of get. We want to get the user. So this is the serializer that will be mostly called, and this is the serializer that we'll be using to create a new user. To bring these two into our settings so that the Djoser will know that we are using the new user create serializer and the user serializer. So we'll save this and we'll head over to our settings.py file, create a new dictionary object. If we head back to the documentation, in the settings part of it, you see how they instructed us to set the serializers under the serializer settings. So look at the sample they gave us. So any serializer that we are overriding, specify the name, then the app serializer to the serializer class name, all lowercase. Authentication. So that was before that. Then the other serializer that we are creating, which is the user serializer for the users. This is, that's what we call it, user serializer. Alright, now for this user serializer, according to the Djoser settings, or how they arranged it, was the required app comes first, followed by the username field. So I don't know if that is a common pattern or if it doesn't really matters, but for us to avoid any kind of threat, we can just bring it that way. So that's for the user serializer. I guess what we need to do is we need to delete our initial migration so that we can make new migrations folder. We are going to delete, I think I can just delete this migration folder, the full migration folder. Just take it out. Alright, that is gone. You can delete the database. Let's just take this out, it will regenerate again. It's out, so we can make migration again while all our files are saved. Here we can say Python manage alright, then we can make our migration now. The same Python manage. Alright, our migration was done. So now we need to also register the model in our admin.py file. So we go to admin.py. We need to bring it from the admin register. Okay, so that's for that. So let's check okay, our server start correctly. So if we head back to now, once we restart, we can see the form. The username is there, the first name is there, but the password fields are not here. So we need to bring in the password repeat settings. If you go to under the settings, you see user create password repeat type. We need to bring this in. So once we head into our settings file, in here we can bring that in. Alright, so we need to do this, and if we head back and refresh, alright, so we can see the username field, the first name, last name, email, password, and reset password. Alright, so let's try that. Let's try and create a new user. Let's just call this test user. Alright, so let's test it out if we can actually create new user. So once we hit the post, you can see a new user was actually created for us with the username, the first name, the last name, and the user is email and the ID, just as the way we specified it in the serializer. Alright, what we'll do now, let's try and see if we can log in with this user. Let's go to token/login, and you can see it's asking us for password and then email. So our email there was Henry. Alright, let's see it. Alright, you can see our hot token is returned back to us. That is, our login was successful. So we can sign up with our new user model, and we can also log in with our new user serializer. Alright, so this video is already getting too long. I will strongly advise you go over this Djoser documentation. It's very easy to set up and it's very simple to use. You can also use it with JWT, that is a JSON Web token. If you want to use JSON Web token instead of using the Django REST framework auth token, you can decide to use your own JWT. Alright, so I will stop this video here. It's already getting too long. In our next video, we look into serialization proper. I will look and try and understand how to really create serialize our data and all that. Alright, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. See you guys in the next video.